I'm very happy to be able to kick off the technical sessions here. I guess that those of you who are in here for the last 45 minutes got a preview of the tech sessions. I'm Greg Burns. I've been chairing the Technical Steering Committee of the AllSeen Alliance for the last 2 years. Those of you who've been on the calls for the Technical Steering Committee have probably heard me drone on from time to time. So I want to talk about some of the things that we've accomplished in the last year, some of the things that have worked, maybe some of the things that we still need to work on. But we've done a ton. And the last year, since I talked about our accomplishments a year ago at the last summit. Oops, let's see if I can get this right. Come on. Oh. There we go. We've come a long way. We've had 3 major releases of the core. We had the Technical Steering Committee face-to-face in March, which was the first time we'd actually managed to get the Technical Steering Committee together in one room, and it was a very productive, it was a day and a half, but to be honest, it felt like a lot more than a day and a half, but we accomplished an awful lot in that day and a half. We hired a full-time AllSeen build release engineer. One of the challenges that we've got in the Alliance is that, to a large extent, the Alliance is the people in this room, right? It's the membership. And we rely very heavily on the membership to contribute and provide the manpower and resources. But there are some things that it's very difficult to persuade any one company to shoulder the burden on. And build and release for the entire AllSeen Alliance is one of those areas. So fortunately, we were able to allocate budget for hiring a full-time build and release engineer. So I don't know how many of you know Rye Jones. I don't know if Rye's in the room here. I don't see him. Yep, there he is. But Rye's your guy. So it really helps because this is a service that the entire membership depends on. We formed the IRB, the Interface Review Board, which there's really 2 aspects to AllJoin and the technology, and 2 sort of levels of responsibility for the AllSeen Alliance on the technical front. One is the core. It's the core framework, the thing that handles device discovery and service discovery and sending of messages back and forth and marshalling and unmarshalling and all that stuff. And then there's the interfaces that we build on top of them, because that's the standards that we are developing that allow for interoperability between various appliances and devices, beyond that interoperability that's implicit in what you get from the core. So if we're going to have people developing interfaces, we need to have some way of ensuring that they meet a certain levels of quality, and that's what the IRB is all about. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. We formed a security subcommittee because we wanted to have some body that was a body in the sense of a subcommittee that was responsible for ensuring that we have a good sense of what security means for the AllSeen Alliance, that we have agreement, that we have best practices, and that we can publish those best practices. So that's what the security subcommittee is all about. And it was it's a very sort of important milestone in the maturation of the AllSeen Alliance. Gateway Agent, based on the 1412 core, was released, and that was released with a great deal of interest from the analysts and press, who really recognized that was a very important component in the AllSeen story that we have. Prior to that, we've been very focused on just in-home, device-to-device, proximal-based connectivity, always knowing that we had to address the connectivity of the outside world, and that's where the Gateway Agent comes in and why that release was so important. We established an AllJoin ambassador program, I believe there's going to be a session this week with an introduction to the All Joint ambassadors and explaining who they are and what they do. And then finally, and this came out of the TSC face-to-face discussions, we budgeted and approved outsourcing of certain test capabilities. These are test capabilities that are essentially services to the alliance again, and having any one individual company shouldering the burden for all of that was clearly unreasonable. And so we budgeted and approved outsourcing test capabilities for automated test system and for release testing. And although that's not fully wound up at this point in time, we expect it to be fully wound up by the 1604 release. So since the last AllSeen Alliance Summit, I said we had 3 major releases. We had the 1412 release. This was really primarily focused on performance, but we also introduced UDP for router-node to router-node connectivity. It was experimental at that point in time, as in it was not the mainstream protocol. That was still TCP. We added auto-pinger support, which is part of maintaining a good sense of presence detection. We switched over to MDNS for router node discovery. Prior to that, we had an MDNS-like protocol that was homegrown and used an all-joint specific multicast address. But we switched over to MDNS, and one of the main reasons we did that is because we're running into trouble getting the all-join discovery packets through routers that blocked everything but MDNS. So it was important for us to do that. I say routers, actually Wi-Fi access points. And we moved the About feature into core. This was sort of part of migrating from a well-known name-based discovery mechanism to discovery based on capabilities, which is what About is all about. 1504, that release introduced X509 certificates and smart router node selection. We also added the observer functionality, which was rounding out some of the pub-sub capabilities in the all-join core. And we did some router node to router node optimization. Some of them were to reduce the amount of chatter that takes place when you have a lot of router nodes on the network. That's not a particularly recommended architecture, but unfortunately it's something that can happen because it is possible to build applications that bundle router nodes. And certainly in testing we were finding that we would often get many router nodes on a network. So we've done a bunch of optimizations in that space. And then we did some updates with the crypto algorithms. The main part of that is we actually, we had been dependent on OpenSSL on Android, which was causing us a little bit of pain, unnecessary pain, since we had implementations, open source implementations of those crypto algorithms, in particular AES, that were available on some platforms and not on others. So we kind of consolidated it and normalized it so we could actually avoid a dependency on third-party crypto algorithms when we choose to. There's nothing wrong with having dependencies on third-party crypto algorithms, but it was causing us pain on Android. Latest release, 1509, and the big ticket item on there is Security 2.0, which we have released as a developer preview. Now, why do we say developer preview? We said developer preview because although it is complete, it's not a beta, we want to have the ability, reserve the right, if you will, to make some changes and tweaks as people start using it. So we're giving ourselves basically between 1509 and 1604 some leeway to tweak the APIs, possibly even tweak some of the wire protocol if it turns out to be necessary, in order to ensure that come 1604, we have got something that everybody feels is what's needed, and we've had some experience in the real world with developers using it. So I'm going to encourage you, if you're writing applications using AllJoin based on 1509, please use Security 2.0. Please use the features, because otherwise we will have failed in our objective in being a developer preview. And we will not get the kind of feedback and exposure. And if there are problems that you encounter or complexities that you don't understand, then we have a chance to get the feedback and try to address those. We made some enhancements on the authentication front and some API improvements. These were not sort of big ticket items, not like the Security 2.0. We did some refactoring of the thin client tree to make it a little bit easier to port and a little bit more rational. And then we've added support for UDP for thin client to router node communication. So that's pretty much a summary of the big ticket items, or the main items, for 1509. So as I said, the Technical Steering Committee March 2015 face-to-face was really a very valuable, well-spent time. It was, as I said, the first time we really gathered the Technical Steering Committee together in one room. Those of you who've been on the calls know that the Technical Steering Committee meetings are, it's sometimes difficult to get people to speak up. There are really a small number of people who actually do speak up on those calls. It's open to everybody, by the way. Anybody can call in. Anybody can ask questions. Anybody can request that the Technical Steering Committee focus on specific issues. It's really up to you, right? And I don't know how many times I will say it. I'll probably say it a lot over the course of the next few days, but you are the AllSeen Alliance. It's the membership, right? It's your alliance. The Technical Steering Committee is just a steering committee, right? So you tell us which way to steer, and we can steer. It's like a self-driving car, right? Microsoft hosted the meeting in Bellevue. We really appreciated that. There were 4 main topics: work group and project rationalization. We kind of grew a little bit organically as we started the AllSeen Alliance. We kind of made a best guess. Oh, let's have these projects and working groups, and it was all pretty much grandfathered in from the original code contributions, and we didn't get it quite right. So we went back and we refactored it, and as a consequence of that, we ended up with a smaller number of working groups, and we redistributed some of the projects, and we changed some names. We also spent a little bit of time on project process refinement. There were some areas where we hadn't quite got a crisp process on how projects get developed and how they get organized into working groups. So we spent quite a lot of time debating that and coming up with a tighter process. We also talked about test automation, release testing. In fact, this is where that whole notion of outsourcing it actually came up. The situation was there was one member company, and that was Qualcomm, Qualcomm Connected Experiences, doing all of the automation and release testing. And to be honest, it was just becoming a gigantic burden. And as the alliance was getting bigger and we were seeing it become bigger and more platforms and so on, we really said, look, we can't do it all, guys. So we were able to get the board to approve a budget, and based on recommendations from the Technical Steering Committee, we are, as I said, we're in the process of getting that all outsourced. And then we talked about the technical roadmap. As a result of the work group rationalization, we took, I think we had about 8 maybe work groups at the time. We factored it down to these 6. And this may even change again over time, but So core, which is where that's where the all-joined thin core library and standard core library routing node, and then also the all-joined JS project sits. And those are the main projects within core at this point in time. We renamed what had been called base services and call it common frameworks, and put base services, location services, and media delivery under that. And that then forms the common frameworks working group and projects. Smart Spaces, which I think was a much better name than we had previously. Previously we'd had lighting as its own working group, which really didn't make a great deal of sense in the context of some of the other activities. So rather than having lighting be a separate working group, we created the Smart Spaces working group, moved lighting under that, and also gave us a home for I used the acronym HAE because home appliances and entertainment didn't fit, it would wrap. So HAE, the home controller and living scenarios projects sit under Smart Spaces. Gateway, that pretty much stayed as it was, but we've added some projects to that over time, in particular the device system bridge, which is a contribution that Microsoft made initially, and I think others are now working on that also, to bridge out from all-join into other networks. In particular, I think Microsoft contributed Z-Wave and BACnet. I don't know whether anything else has been contributed at this point. I think that's the primary two, with possibly others to follow in the future. But if we do a thread bridge to something like, if we ever did a bridge to HomeKit or Google Nest Weave, that would probably fit within that. That would fit within that space, or Zigbee, right? And then also update service, which is there for supporting over-the-air updates of all-joined devices. Compliance and certification is that essentially stayed as it was, and then the developer support working group. I think that was just a slight rename, but essentially maintains its function and purpose, which is as a place for tools that are used by developers to develop all-joined software. And right now, there's only one real contribution in that space, and that's the code generator. So what we had to do on the project process refinement is we really wanted to clarify the project lifecycle definitions. They were, we had proposal, incubation, mature, and archived. But we needed to clarify exactly what they were and how the transitions took place as a project goes through the phases of being proposed, going into incubation, mature, and then archived. And that's what we did in that process in the process of refining. We also identified gating, the gating criteria. How do we know when a project moves from one phase to the other? We looked at the interface, the initial contributions. We needed a history of active development. We then wanted to also plug into that process interface review and security review. The full process is, as approved by the TSC, is documented. I'm not going to go, obviously, talk through the entire process. There's a link there if you want to go into the details. And I recommend you do. I think it's useful to understand how the AllSeen Alliance actually operates at that level, because it will, if you have an idea for a project that you want to propose, then the information is all there explaining how to do that. So the basic project phases are proposal, incubation, mature, and archived. A proposal, a project in the proposal phase doesn't really exist yet. It has no resources, but it's expected to be created. Somebody has identified a need and said, yep, we'd like this project, and we'd like to see whether the membership is interested in participating as contributors and committers. Do they have resources? And that's generally how proposals start. Usually proposals, so to date really, proposals that have come in usually have already had initial contributors and committers, and in many cases even code associated with them. So it comes in as initial code contributions. But that's certainly not required. A project proposal can come in, absent those, provided that resources are identified to actually do some real work on it. The incubation phase is when the project has resources, but it's recognized that it's in its early stages. There's no product-ready code, but there are contributions. So it's beginning to emerge, and we'll wait to see whether it's actually going to see the light of day. And we've had several projects that have gone through the proposal, got into the incubation phase, and essentially stalled for a variety of reasons. Either, in some cases, the individuals that were working on it got reassigned to something else and literally had no time. In other cases, we've had projects where at least one project where the member company that was sponsoring the project decided that they no longer had for business reasons or no longer felt that they had a need to be in the AllSeen Alliance as a member, and that the project essentially went away as a consequence of that. But that's what happens and what you would expect to happen. A mature project is fully functioning, successful, actively maintained, and it's been assigned to a working group. So we've got a history of people contributing code. It's obviously alive. You're seeing, there's JIRA tickets being filed against it. There's code being contributed. It's active. And then finally, the archive phase, where a project has been recognized. It's dead. Nothing's happening. Nobody's working on it. Nobody's maintaining it. Generally, we would not archive a project before asking, does anybody want to pick this up? And if nobody steps up, then we just put it into an archive state. Doesn't mean the code's no longer available. It's all there. It's in, it could be revitalized at some point in the future, but it might take some archaeology. We also looked at, as we, what gating criteria do we want? And particularly, we're going from this incubation phase to mature. We wanted to ensure that there are certain gates that we have that ensure that the project really is not only mature, but meeting the objectives that we have for a project within the AllSeen Alliance. So we wanted the maturity level criteria to be met, which means there are active contributions. There are code reviews going on. There's a release schedule. We know when this code's going to be released. It's getting close, it's at or close to product quality. There are test cases and test code. Test cases and test code is important because we put the burden on the projects and the working groups to provide the test cases that are required for subsequent certification and compliance testing. Who better to know what it takes to have a compliant implementation than the people who are working on the project? So we put the burden on the project team to come up with the test cases for certification and compliance and provide them to the certification and compliance working group. We also need to go through the interface review. The interface review board, Dominique is the chair of the interface review board. He and his team have done a phenomenal job. There's been a lot of interfaces reviewed. They're responsible for just stuff like naming conventions, right? That's not that important, but it ensures that we have some kind of consistency. The interface is at the right level of granularity, that we don't have kitchen sink interfaces that are everything piled in. That the member choices for the interfaces are the right level of granularity, that they look good, the names are right, that we've adequately identified whether we have states or events and characterized them well. We've chosen the right units of measure. We've thought about it. There was quite a debate about whether we should be using fixed point or integers or whatever for units. I came down heavily on the side of let's just use floating point numbers, guys. It's not that hard. And that, I think, for the most part, is what we standardized on. And also, has the interface been designed for security? And that kind of plays into what some of the objectives of the security review team. So there's actually some crossover between the interface review board and the security review board, as you might expect. But the security review looks at the project from the standpoint of the use of security. Is it using security? Or did they just forget about it? What are they employing best practices? What capabilities are what capabilities are being identified in the interface that need to be managed from a security standpoint, and what kind of access control is required? And then any certification and compliance implications. For certain products, we might decide that there are certain certification and compliance criteria that need to be met. And that's something that we have not to date, as far as I'm aware, we've not to date had any C&C requirements, but we certainly could in the future. Let's say if we had an interface for a home security system, we'd almost certainly want to be thinking about the certification and compliance implications that we would have for certifying an all-joint-based home security system. So the Interface Review Board, it's a subcommittee of the Technical Steering Committee. It answers to the Technical Steering Committee. It is not a decision-making board so much as an advisory board, because we didn't want to move decision-making. We didn't want to have two bodies responsible for making decisions. We said the Technical Steering Committee makes decisions. The Interface Review Board is an advisory board, and so far the Technical Steering Committee has accepted all the advice of the Interface Review Board. I would see no reason not to, but basically from a charter standpoint and from a process and a process standpoint, the Technical Steering Committee has the final say. The formation charter was adopted by TSC vote in November 2014, and as I said, Dominique is the chair. The first version of the interface design guidelines was approved by the Technical Steering Committee this February. First interface submitted for review in March. So far, Smart Home Service is pending, that's been submitted, it's pending revision. Location Service is pending revision. Security 2.0 interfaces, they are essentially final. As I said, they are potentially subject to change before 1604 while we're in the development preview stage. But as far as the IRB is concerned, they're happy with them as they stand today. HAE has 16 interfaces approved, but apparently they're being churned on a little bit by the project team. So even though the interfaces as they've been submitted so far to the IRB have been accepted, they may be undergoing some changes. The lighting service framework, lighting services, that was standardized before the IRB was formed, and just as a practical matter, the interfaces have essentially been grandfathered in because they have been deployed. There are products in the marketplace, but we are still awaiting some definition clarifications. And I presume over time they will all be normalized at some future point. And then there's a file transfer and a bulk data transfer interfaces, two interfaces that essentially overlap. So both proposals are being reviewed right now, and I would expect that we will see a single interface come out of the result of that, one would hope. The Security Review Board, like the IRB, is an advisory committee. It was also proposed at the March 2015 Technical Steering Committee face-to-face. The formation and charter was adopted in April. Brian Witten from Symantec is the chair. He's going to be giving a talk, I think, right after this one on security considerations for all join. If you want to get, you want to sit in on that. And we decided that we wanted to leverage the working groups and require a security champion from each working group. And by default, that was the chair of the various working groups, pending the working groups allocating a specific individual responsible for the chair. But basically we said, working groups, you're responsible for security. So please make somebody available for the security security subcommittee. So the activities are underway, being developed by the Security Review Board. There's a security best practices work stream. They participate in the IRB security review of proposed interfaces. They've been working with the CNC working group to incorporate security as a requirement for certification. As I said, there's nothing hard been defined yet, but as I said, I will also expect to see something in that space soon. Identify the static and dynamic analysis tools for automating code vulnerability detection. We thought that was also something that came out of the face-to-face at Technical Steering Committee face-to-face, who said, look, we really should be running code through static and dynamic analysis tools. One of the activities of the Security Review Board is to identify those tools. What am I doing for time? Good. And then JIRA tracking of pre-release security concerns and providing guidance on handling discovered security vulnerabilities. We did discover and fix a vulnerability earlier in the year, and the Security Review Board was active in participating in handling, helping us deal with how that was handled. As I said, the Gateway Agent release is a big deal. It was released as at the 14.12 level on April 19th. Being released on at 14.12 on April 19th might sound a little odd, but when we release anything other than core, if you base something on that version of core, you inherit the version number from core. So since the gateway was released based on the 14.12 core release, it is a 14.12 gateway release. One of the other big milestones, it was actually approved as a component of the all-join base implementation on July 20th. The all-join base implementation, it represents the code that's covered by the patent pledge. And I'm not going to go into details on that, but the information on the AllSeen Alliance patent pledge and patent policy is all on the AllSeen Alliance website. But having it be approved as a component of the all-join base app implementation is quite a big deal. The release included gateway management application, which configures the all-join routing node to manage external network connectors, control app, and then connector sample application, which bridges out to Twitter. The TSC also approved an all-join XMPP connector project for the gateway agent, and beta code was committed on September 1st, and I believe Affinity is demonstrating that. Was that art? Yes. The All-Join Ambassador Program was formed pretty late this year, but maybe 3 or 4 months ago, and really this was largely driven by Philip Desertel. He wanted to ensure that we had we leverage the community and the people that understand the code, enthusiastic experts who know and use the code, as it says here, and are willing to share their knowledge with others around the world. So we've actually had quite a good uptake on that. We have 18 ambassadors to date. The goals of the program is to essentially sustain and grow the worldwide all-join community, be a point of contact in geographic regions, go-to resource, organize and host all-join user group meetings, meetups, possibly even hackfests and the like, and essentially be public representatives of the all-join community in the various geographic regions. And with 18 members, we're getting pretty broad coverage. And it's pretty much open to anybody who is willing to step up. If you feel like you have something to contribute and you think you'd like to participate in the program, nominate yourself and talk to Philip Desertel or Brett, and we'll get you. Just needs a vote by the AllSeen, by the TSC to approve. Release and automated build testing. The proposal from the TSC face-to-face was to have dedicated alliance test resources. We really needed it. We need it badly. We need to share the expense across the membership. We need to, importantly, guarantee resource availability and have the TSC set the priorities for testing versus the priorities of individual members. So when there are specific platforms the Technical Steering Committee believes need to be supported, then the resources can be allocated in that direction, as opposed to being allocated based on whatever one member company decides is their priority, leaving everything else up to, well, whatever, right? We decided that outsourcing would be more practical than the Alliance directly hiring test engineers. We did debate that, but one of the challenges with hiring test resources is concerns about, does it get funded every year? One would hope it would, but if it didn't, that would be a real problem. So we decided that outsourcing was more practical. We sent out a preliminary RFP just to get some budgetary numbers. Once we got those back, we were in a position to request a budget from the board, and the board approved a total budget of $250,000. Final RFPs were sent out to vendors in August, and vendor selection was completed in September, and the contracts are now being finalized. So we expect that to be up and running pretty soon, and fully active and engaged for the 1604 release. So how well are we collaborating? I think you heard some numbers earlier. People were quoting some numbers that gave a sense of how many contributions, how many people contributions. It's actually pretty impressive. I put up this slide last year. This was our collaboration scorecard for 2014. At that time, we had 36 total projects. 19 of them were active. 5 of them were new. That was the incubation phase. So that we did have some inactive projects, even back at that time. We had 70 individual contributors. Contributions were coming in from 13 companies, and there were about 2,700 contributions. There was about 1,600 JIRA tickets submitted. A bunch of them were closed. Most of them closed. There were quite a few open or in progress. And that sort of represents not just bug fixes, but also feature requests and other kinds of issues that have been found. 2015, well, we haven't got a lot more projects. And one of the reasons for that is that's not really the dimension in which we've been growing. And it's, to my mind, that's fine. I think 37 projects is plenty. 15 of them are really active. 6 of them are new. They're just sort of beginning to kick off. But now we've got 122 individual contributors. So we've gone up quite a lot. We've got 30 different companies and over 5,400 contributions. So we've more than doubled. But we've also got nearly 200 member companies now and only 30 companies contributing. So I see that as something we really need to work on. The Alliance is going to be successful if we have people contributing code. If we have people contributing code, contributing to test cases, contributing to the design and development and growth of the AllSeen Alliance and the code base. So this is my shout out. This is good. We're seeing good growth, but we need to see a heck of a lot more. And I'd really like to see companies that are members who are committed to the AllSeen Alliance, committed to the vision, start allocating a resource. I mean, if you're a billion-dollar company and you can't find one person to allocate full-time to the AllSeen Alliance as a developer, then I think you're not trying very hard. So we really do. We depend on having contributors, people who can develop code, who are assigned, and you'll benefit from it because you will have an in-house expert. Somebody will become your go-to person, and we really do in order to develop the alliance and grow it and have it meet the goals that we all have for it, we absolutely have to have more engagement than what we're seeing. So that's my summary, and I think the other sessions are beginning to start. So thank you all, and I hope you enjoy the technical sessions, and I hope everybody gets a lot out of it.